listening to In-Fisherman Storyline, North America's top voice in multi-species freshwater angling. Here is your host, Thomas Allen.
Okay, well, hey, welcome to In-Fisherman Storyline. We're on the road again, and this is one of the buckets we've created to take you on the road with us. So we're calling this On the Road or Road Trips, and one of these days when we've shot enough of these, I think one name will stick. Right now, we're kind of bouncing between a couple, but bottom line is we're at Leech Lake, and this is Trapper's Landing Resort. Is that right, Bailey?
Yep.
This is a very special place. If you've ever wanted to visit the Great North, if you want to walleye fish on a legendary fishery or go muskie fishing or smallmouth fishing, Leech Lake has got to be on your bucket list. It's a wonderful place. And if you're going to stay somewhere that can access a bulk of the lake, Trapper's Landing, talk about a beautiful experience, wonderful facility. I would love to buy this place and run it, but I could never afford it.
This place is top notch.
It's something else, and we're here. We've been trying to muskie fish, and we're going to get into how that went yesterday. We're putting some new Fenwick elite predator rods to work, and one of the ways that rods or gear gets tested is on the professional bass or walleye trails, right? But when it comes to some of these other species-specific rods, we need to get together with like-minded folks, get out there, put them to the use on the right kind of place, and report back. And so we're actually here with the world-famous kayak angler from Buffalo, New York, Bailey Eigbrett, who is account manager. That's probably not nearly strong enough title at Gunpowder.
Senior PR manager.
Okay, so that's much better than what I thought you were.
We can roll with whatever you got, though.
So Bailey does a ton of kayak bass angling, competes and wins almost everything he fishes in.
No. Not even close.
No, he does pretty good, but he's a charming young guy. I really like him. And then next to him is David. We're going to call him Dave for today. Brinkerhoff.
Brinkerhoff.
See, I told you I was going to do that.
I think you did it on purpose.
I did do it on purpose. Brinkerhoff, and he is I'll let him give you his specific title, but whenever you pick up a Fenwick rod, you know that he's had his fingerprints on that thing. And probably, is it just Fenwick?
No,
it's all
actually
rods.
all rods. Yeah. So I'm R&D director for rods at Pure Fishing. So it's Fenwick, Abu, Ugly Stick. You know, there's 9 rod brands there. So a little bit of everything, but obviously we're here at Leech, fishing the Fenwicks.
Well, as muskie fishing so often goes, they did not cooperate, but Dave did in fact catch one not too far from the shores of camp here. Nice, cute little fish, as we said, that committed suicide. But there really is an element of being here. And while you want to catch a fish while you're muskie fishing, and I think that's an important part to proving and testing all rods, depending on the technique of the species. But as far as I'm concerned, if you want to really test and get good results out of muskie rods, you don't necessarily need to catch the fish to understand how well they're going to perform, because it is an overload. It's a incredible battle, usually at boat side. And I've had rods break in the past while presenting, while casting. I've never had a rod fail of any brand when I've had a big muskie on. So while that's your goal, you want to do that. You want pictures, you want content. We did put these through the paces. We used some heavy baits. We used blades. We used jerk baits. We used big rubber. We're going to talk about that too. We need to change the name of that bait.
Oh, the Jar Jar Binks bait?
Yeah, that's probably a copyright infringement, but Savage has a new line of muskie baits that I can tell you right now are very impressive. So, Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that you work, you're probably a lot like me. We work in the fishing business to fund our hunting addiction. And you're not going to get on the In-Fisherman podcast and hear about elk hunting very much, but I do want to talk a little bit about what makes you tick.
Sure. So, I've been in this industry essentially my entire professional career. I'm going into 24 years into rod development. Mm-hmm. A lot of that was, before Pure, it was, Shimano and G. Loomis side. And I've been at Pure at just going over a little over 3 years now. But there is no doubt that a lot of that has spawned and kind of made it to where my true passion and what I spend my actual vacation days on is elk hunting, which is my passion. But you know, the benefit of that is my work gets me the opportunity to, you know, be places like, you know, here at Leech and a lot of other things. So, you know, I'm still fishing, you know, 100 days a year, but you know, most of that on my own time and weekends and evenings and all of that, testing rods and doing all that. But so
you're based out of Washington. What part of Washington?
I'm Southwest Washington, so right on the Columbia River. I'm within a mile of the Columbia and a mile of the Cowlitz River there. So I've got, you know, smallmouth, largemouth, salmon, steelhead, sturgeon. Like it's kind of the mecca of
Columbia
ponds.
River, I've never been, but it has been on my list of places I want to go, especially for the walleye fishing. But it is kind of like a mixed bag of trophy caliber fish up and down. Sturgeon too. That's a destination for big white sturgeon, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, lots and lots of sturgeon. Yeah, I mean, it's really not all that well known, but tons of great fish in there.
Right. It's a long ways from everything too.
Yeah.
It's the great Northwest, which is a beautiful part of the country. I have family up there. I need to probably come take advantage of that. So for the sake of me promising we were going to do this when we started out, talk to me about why elk hunting. What is it about an elk that just makes you tick?
You know,
You gave a great description down at the fire, and I want that again.
oh man, I mean it's the rush and just the interaction, and I'm bow hunting for elk, not predominantly, but that's all I do. I've actually shot one elk with a gun in my life. So it's just, I'm archery hunting and it's just the thrill and the rush and the communication that you have back and forth. And I mean, it's just getting down and dirty and in their face. And man, that's what makes me tick.
If you had one place to go, where would you end up?
Oh, that's a good one. Probably New Mexico. Yeah. I mean, just, quantity and yeah, just the interaction. I mean, you get a lot more there, but boy, it's that's a hard one.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of great places to enjoy muskies, and when I say enjoy, I mean you just gotta
Less painful.
you have to commit to the battle. But I think that as a hunter myself, muskies really talk to me. That's something I really enjoy, and you have to embrace the suck. I think that's a part of packing out an elk. That's a part of your first or second rendition of a new rod. You know, there's going to be frustrations, but ultimately the puzzle, putting the puzzle pieces together, the interaction, again, whether it's the way the rod performs in your hand, the way that a muskie performs at boat side, or the way the elk comes up and down a mountain to respond to your call, you have to be able to zig and zag at a moment's notice. And I think that it's probably fair to say that's kind of what makes you tick.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. And it's also, you know, just how to make it, you know, just like muskie fishing, and it's how to make it more comfortable, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, you do embrace the suck, and you know, I think pretty much every elk hunter that I know, I mean, you know, you dread the pack, but man, like you love every second of it. And without that pack and without that hurt and without that pain the next day, you're like, you know, it's just brings it to a new level.
You said something that I'm going to prod you on this, because this speaks to me on every level of whether it's turkey hunting, whitetail hunting, muskie fishing, bass fishing. I don't think that the level of success that you know is pure does not happen without earning every bit of it.
Sure. There is no doubt of that. I mean, there's, you know, tons of work, tons of dedication, just thoughts and, you know, all of that go into it. And it's a never ending process. There is no doubt on that.
Well, you said you're on your pack out or you're done. You just sit down on a rock, you watch the sunset, and you're like, that moment, everything's done. You capitalized, shot a great elk, whatever it was, but right. You sit down and recognize the fact that we put everything into this, months of probably planning, training, saving money, getting there, not making a mistake. And then when it all comes to fruition, you can actually sit down, take a deep breath, and be like, that was worth every bit of the effort.
Oh, undoubtedly. And, you know, there's also on the other side of that, you know, almost opposite. It's like, you know, those little things that did go wrong. It's like, you know, those are the ones that stick with you too, that are like, man, look, we're going to change that next time.
Well, I think you have to expect things to go wrong.
Oh, mm-hmm. That's a given.
That's a given. In our sport, especially when we do get-togethers like this, I know, Bailey, you know, I've done a handful of these together, and I've done quite a few with our friend Josh Ward. Mm-hmm. And then even back around the time you were born, Kevin Jarnigan is a longtime friend of mine, and he put on these events with Josh. They worked together at Blue Heron back in the day. And I have some just amazing memories with those guys when things were not going right. And I kind of feel like that when you make the most of what you've got, sometimes that redefines the whole trip. Are you still accomplishing what you came to do and collecting content and spending time with people, building relationships, but also understanding what went into making this product? And a lot of times we debut, or, I'm not in the manufacturing side. So you guys generally debut a product at ICAST, or it might come out at the Bassmaster Classic. And one of the biggest things, or requests I get as a media guy is, how do we tell the story of where this product came from? And I mean, there are countless baits, rods, reels, trolling motors, electronics, coolers that have an amazing story attached to it. And not this year, last year, Bailey, I think there was a guy from Alaska, maybe, that developed a cooler.
Yep, last year.
Yeah, and
The
his
one I cast, right?
Yep.
yeah, and his story was epic. Like, lived in a van down by the river, literally, to build this cooler, and had a life story that led up to it. And I think that he told that story enough that the word got around, and that's what won ICAST.
Certainly.
So I do feel like there's a backstory that people needed to get into, and I brought a couple rods in just to kind of get your reaction. The original Muskie Predator rod from, there was what did I have? A Tecna AV, and then the Predator from Fenwick. And those rods have been in my possession since they came out, and they're two of my favorites. But you start somewhere. And I know that you've not been with Fenwick probably since the inception of rod building, but you've been around long enough to know the history and know what went into that. So let's talk a little bit about the Elite Predator series and I guess what it takes to make a modified broomstick to...
Yeah. So, and I think one of the things that, and one of the benefits of just coming out here to a place like Leech, and the other thing to talk about here is, we have actually quite a few people that don't get the opportunity to muskie fish, right? And myself is included, right? So, that's one of the things that, even though we're not catching a bunch of fish out here, we're getting the opportunity to make, thousands of casts, right? And to have somebody that hasn't ever muskie fished a day in their life to come out here and fish, 14 hours a day and not catch a fish, but, not be just dying, and in pain, and I think that's also kind of one huge thing to win and take away from this too. But again, not going to your question there, right?
No, that's fine. That's what this is for. We don't have a time limit. but I mean, Leech Lake is a legendary destination.
Yep.
There's some amazing stories, and I think that there's probably an element of you expect to catch one when you come to a place like this. And just like a 350 class bull or a 180 inch whitetail, like, they don't live around every tree and every rock. And they do not cooperate, but we talked about embracing the suck. And whenever you muskie fish anywhere in the world, there are some exceptions where they cooperate, but it's mostly a timing thing. You need to expect there to be 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 days of not catching a fish.
Sure.
And then, you're kind of putting things together. And I feel like we were just starting to get there where we had some patterns going, or something kind of coming together. And we're actually sitting inside this morning in one of these wonderful cabins because it's rainy and windy out there. And that's probably optimal muskie conditions, if I were to be honest. However, my fun meter gets pegged pretty quick when it goes that way. But excuse me, we're going to burp on a podcast.
Nice.
Have another cup of coffee. We're not changing this. This is raw.
Yeah.
So, what were your expectations, Bailey? Did you think you'd catch a few when you came here?
Mine are a little misconstrued, if you will, being that I'm not a big muskie guy, where I kind of relied on Ben Anderson on our team, who's the muskie head from around these parts too. Where he's like, yeah, going into it, he goes 2-3 bites a day is really good. So I kind of got the idea of that from here, that this was going to be a grind. And I think everybody knew it for the most part coming into this event. That it was, we're not going to go catch 5 a day type of deal like we do on bass trips or walleye trips.
Right, but you could.
Right.
I mean, you really could. That's happened, and this is a place. If you want to look up a cool story, the legendary. Good Lord, now I'm forgetting it already. My brain is mush after 3 days of muskie fishing. The Great Leech Lake Muskie Rampage.
Yeah.
And there was a time, I think it was late July in mid 50s, where the muskies just committed suicide. They were eating everything. They were huge, and I think they had the right combination of hot weather, cool water, and just everything fell into place where everybody was catching them all the time. But that was back in the day when they were keeping these fish, because the mentality of the muskie community is to treat very carefully and release every fish. And I think that's important for conservation. But there was a time when these fish were nearly fished out because they didn't understand how few of them there really are in these waters.
Sure.
It's the lodge that we've been having our meals at has a lot of cool history down at on the walls and things like that. Like to your point, some of the old pictures you got, like guys on a stringer and it's like 12 giant muskies sitting on there. That you post that today and you're gonna get torched.
Yeah. Well, so the point that I'm making is we may not catch a big one. I mean, I think there's a little bit of time to go fishing yet, but I think you still can put these rods through the paces and understand what they're capable of.
No doubt. And I mean, and that's kind of the point that I was getting at there. And, we did do a lot of background and a lot of, thought that went into all of these rods, and a lot of it was just the ergonomics and what the human body actually is best and most comfortable. Also how much movement you get, with the sizes, and there's a lot of different things that we did with that. And that was from the muskie side all the way to the bass and walleye side, and all the reel seats, handles, all of that. We did a lot of background. Actually even hired a firm that they did a lot of work with surgical tools, and that's actually how we got a lot of the background and story behind that to try to figure out what was best, what was the best diameters, what was the best tapers and all of that, to actually get all of that detail to make sure that all of this product was the most ergonomic and easiest to fish on your body, and just overall looks.
I have heard this from numbers of people within the pure fishing stratosphere. Dan and Kyle down at Berkeley go through countless prototypes, and they make sure that when it hits the shelves, by their standards, it's perfect. And you have to do the same thing in the rod side of the business. I mean, how many prototypes do you feel like you went through? And I know I don't know how many new SKUs were added to Fenwick over the last 2 years, a bunch, but you have to make sure that when those are headed out the factory door, going to tackle shop stores and shelves and rod racks, that you're confident they're going to be as perfect as absolute possible.
Oh, 100%. So we developed 264 SKUs, probably the biggest rod launch and for sure in our history, maybe at one time, maybe in the industry. And it did take us 2 years to get there.
Yeah.
But with that said, on every one of those rods, before we even sent that design out to start the pre-production phases of it, we built and broke 18 of each model. Before that even started, and also the precursor to that is to get all of those actions and powers right. So there's 4, 5, 6 generations. Some of the problem ones were up to 8 generations, and so you're building 4 of every one of those generations to get there, and then you're building another dozen, and then you're breaking all of those, and just to get everything that you need. I mean, there's literally thousands of rods broken to get to this point.
At what point is there a point in that process where you're like, damn it, like I thought we had it this time? Does that happen?
There is, and there's always a learning curve, and we're figuring out how to put things together a little bit better, and definitely learned a few things on this Fenwick, but that's just kind of that's what we do, and I mean it's a tough one, but we're definitely continuing on that path, and it's fun.
So we could talk a lot about muskies, and I want to. We're going to talk about that some, but let's run me through the lineup. What if you're going to buy a new Fenwick rod, which I know that, did you release all of them in 2023, or was it a stagger release? Okay, all of it in 2023.
Yep.
I remember I talked to Justin Poe in your booth, and he's like, look at all these rods. I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of rods here, but you see that. But I didn't realize at the time, like every single one of those rods, which were almost aisles worth of rods, were brand new to the industry. Right. And there was a time, I think Fenwick has always been I think you could find them across the country, but to me, it's been a northern brand. I feel like people here recognize Fenwick. They know that, Abu Garcia has definitely made its way into the north as a mainstay, but Fenwick to me has always been the multi-species. You want a Fenwick, no matter your species,
Exactly.
it's there. So start at Panfish. What can people find?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got everything from, panfish rods to salmon and steelhead rods, and I mean, we went deep into all of these. I mean, in the salmon and steelhead rods, we've got kokanee trolling rods, like, casting little ultralight rods. I mean, there's inshore rods, bass, walleye, obviously the muskie rods. So, I mean, there's really, for pretty much any fishery in North America, we've got a rod for it in Fenwick.
I've spent some time with the world-class rods, which were those specifically for walleye and bass, or was that kind of dedicated to one species originally, or is that across the whole spectrum?
It is. Well, it's not across the whole spectrum. So on world class, we do have bass and walleye both, but not inshore. So there's definitely a few changes in there, but it's not for everything. But it is predominantly bass and walleye.
So those rods have been awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, like lightweight and sensitive, and I mean, right now in the forward-facing sonar world, some of those spinning rods are perfect for that. Right. Did you have that in mind?
Oh, for sure. I mean, how can you not, right? So, and as we're looking through that, I mean, there's no doubt in those 264 SKUs that we've got, there's probably, 10 or 15 more that we need, and we're searching for those. While we're here, we're talking to all you guys, trying to figure out, what is there any holes? Is there anything else that we're missing? So we're always thinking about that. And I mean, yeah, forward facing. I mean, to talk about that, everybody has, that's the new buzzword, right? So,
well, ICAST this year was the year of the spinning rod. It really was.
No doubt,
100%.
And I mean, yeah, some of them are better, but just because it's a forward facing called rod, it's great for a lot of things other than that too, right?
I want to keep digging into the variations and all the options within the new Fenwick lineup, but let's take a step back to your testing phase. So you said you broke numbers of rods. Are you sitting in your office banging it against a wall? You sticking it in a ceiling fan? Are you slamming it in a car door? What's your testing process to get this to work, to know what they're capable of?
So everyone is broken identically the same in a machine. So we have them all at the same angle.
You're trying to break it.
Oh, it's going to break. Like it's 100%. Like it's going to break, and we've got to make sure that they're meeting the spec required. And on a lot of these things, we're looking at 40 pounds plus on how much actual physical pull. And I don't know about yourself, but like going out there and actually trying to lift a bowling ball is not that hard or not that easy.
It's not easy at all.
It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of it that goes into it, and I mean we're making these things as bulletproof as we can to make sure that we're not going to have any failures in the field, but also everything that goes into it is making sure that it's also the best for balance. Sensitivity always comes into more of a weight thing than the actual sensitivity side, but because the two are essentially in parallel with one another. But balance is even more important on top of that, in my opinion, just because of the fishability and the comfort.
So talk about your turnaround time on a generation. So you have one rod that broke. Okay. You're going to make some modifications to get the next rendition in. Yep. How long does that take?
So that's the beauty of us with this Fenwick and really all of our product is so we see that, and we're doing all of this break in Spirit Lake in Iowa, right? So once we get that break, and if it's if it doesn't meet action, doesn't meet strength, the turnaround time on that is at most a week. Right?
Oh wow!
So it's redesigned, rebuilt, and goes back into the process. So it's a really quick turnaround, but when you're taking 264 SKUs, it starts adding up.
Oh, I can see why you take vacation. Guy's going to need some time off. So you get these new rods in, you break them again, you get through it. Are you trying to not eventually break them, or is it to a point where how do I say this? Like granted, you're trying to break these rods, but you want to get to a point where you can anticipate that and it responds before it breaks. What's your standard there?
No, so we do want them to break, and we will actually redesign a rod if it's too strong, because if it's too strong, we can actually make that lighter physical weight, because we're building these to a point to where there's really no physical way to actually for the angler to break them, with the exception of, you put them in a ceiling fan, shut them in a door. Those are always going to break, no matter how strong you
If you need a field tester to ceiling fan and car door rod, I have been very good at that. So,
but yeah, so I mean, we do actually. We take every one to failure just to make sure, because again, if they're too strong, we're going to actually redesign those to bring them back into line to where they should be, to where we know they're not going to have an issue, but they're also the best product that we can put out there.
So you're pushing these to a point where the average angler is not going to exceed, or maybe not even reach. Like there's a point where, as a fisherman, you're not lifting a bowling ball, right? But you want to know how that rod performs under a load that it wasn't necessarily built to handle.
100%. You know, like a heavy bass rod that's rated 14 to 20, we're going to break that thing at 20 pounds. You're probably not going to deadlift a 20-pound bass, nor are you going to catch one. But.
No, not this guy. But I mean, what's cool though is when you pick up these rods, they've been in the hands of a lot of people. They've been tested. I know, Bailey, you spend an awful lot of time on the water, being a famous kayak angler, and. Okay, so I am giving him a hard time, but if you recognize Bailey and if you recognize his voice here, it's because he is a podcaster also, and has a much more successful podcast than the one that we're doing here. So I'm actually trying to piggyback off of his fame to take this up a notch.
All three people that listen to ours maybe they'll listen to yours.
Well, my mother listens to this one occasionally, and then I think my wife has said she's heard it a time or two. But talk to me about what you do on the water with this gear when you get it. Do you send reports in? Do you get it as a finished product? What's your role with that?
In regards to that, I mean, I can make mentions, but I don't know if my feedback's actually worth of any account. True.
But you fish all the time. Like that's the point is you are on the water. Your opinion matters with this stuff. Like you understand how things need to perform, and especially in a kayak. I mean, there's some intricacies there. Do you find that these work perfectly for your scenario, just in general? Yeah,
I mean, from boat to kayak to bank, I usually don't really change up. At least like the rod that I'm using for technique.
That's important. You can use it under multiple scenarios.
Right. I mean, like for punching, for some people say that you can't use a rod over 7.3 or 7.5, whatever, in a kayak, and I think it's a load of crap. I punch with a 711 extra heavy, and you can do it sitting down a kayak just fine if you can understand technique. But I think along the chain of communication here, me and my role, being from talking to Pure Fishing to you as media, it's important for me to understand how it performs along that line. That way I can talk to it and not be just spewing off of a press release or something like that. And I think that's one thing at Gunpowder anyway. Our team is like, we live in the field, and that allows us to better help with the rods and the products that we put out, and then be able to, I can resonate with you. Like we can have a conversation about fishing, not just me being a guy in a suit from the city that's never touched
I've never seen him wear a suit.
Can't say that I have either.
That's what I love about Gunpowder and working in the outdoor space. I can wear a hat. I can wear what I want to wear.
That's true.
Yeah.
There have been a very small number of black tie events I've been able to attend, but they kicked me out the door because I wasn't wearing the right clothes. So they asked me to come. I didn't end up making it. But in the long run, you want to get these rods in the hands of anglers who are going to put them through the paces. You do the development, you do the testing, you get the product as perfect as possible. At that point, that's when a pro staff comes in, right?
Certainly.
Talk about how they get those and what they use them for.
Yeah, so I mean, we vet them throughout, and we're very confident that there's going to be few changes. But I mean, we're not out there, 300 days a year doing that. I mean, some of us are out there a lot, but none of us get the opportunities to be on the water as much as we'd like.
That's right.
But we want to put them in more people's hands, and we do utilize a lot of our pro staff to do that. And it's kind of funny, and maybe we shouldn't go down this rabbit hole, but one funny thing that I've actually learned, and some of the communication that we get, is we learn a lot more just from a standard fishing conversation than actually like filling out a form to say, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And, while Bailey says maybe his, he doesn't feel like his information is as useful, that's far from the truth as you can get, right? Because just a standard fishing conversation, you can glean more from that than, like literally putting out a 3-page document to ask, questions about what you think. And the one funny thing is that we found is that when you ask a fisherman what he would change to make it better, they can never, ever give you an answer on that. And they're going to tell you that they really like this one and just make it, lighter or make it, faster. But it's never like, hey, change it, 18 inches from here to do that. So we gain a lot more. And granted, it's not a lot of people have the background, and nor should they get as nerdy as I do with fishing rods.
Right.
So it's a unique space and something where we get a lot more information just from fishing and having that conversation.
Do you anticipate then, like, some of your final generations to have that angler input, or do you think by the time that they're getting it, you're where you need to be?
So we're confident enough that we're really close to where we need to be. And then by the time we get to that angler input, it's really small modifications. It's guide spacing, guide sizing. And there is times, and there has been times where we have changed some actions, but we didn't actually change any actions on Fenwick. We have on some other series, but it's very limited in one or two SKUs for the most part, and a lot of it's just minute changes at that point.
So when we talk technique specific, one of my favorite things has been using rods designed to present a certain bait a certain way. I really like crankbait fishing, and I think there have been very few perfect crankbait rods out there. The Ike series they're the easiest to understand. If you're looking to buy a specific rod for a specific technique, the delay series, I think, is what they're called in his lineup. It made sense to me, just other than, I'm buying a glass rod for a crankbait, right? Okay, there are different weights, there are different lengths. The way that you cast a crankbait, it has a shorter handle. They're very ergonomically friendly, but when you're fishing a crankbait, the delayed series, essentially, if you were to give it a term, it slows you down so that you're not ripping something away from the fish. Okay, why do you want that? Why not just take a swing and set the hook like you're on a short line with a bass in the slop? Well, they're chasing a lure and they're swiping at it, and sometimes, as you guys know, they don't get all the hooks in their face, and it would be really easy with a stiff rod to yank that away from them. Mm-hmm. So and that's just a single example where there are countless techniques. So and bass fishing specifically really seems to have countless actions and techniques. So walk through that lineup a little bit. What's collect the whole set, they say, right? There's a reason to have all that stuff, but how many lines do you have or different rods do you have in the bass world specifically?
Oh boy, that's
loaded question.
That is a loaded question because I do not know the answer. It's pretty close to 100. I think it's just shy of 100 in all four series, right?
Okay.
So in total, Eagle, HMG, Elite, and World Class, there's 90 something ish bass rods.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But so divide that by 4. So you're thinking maybe there's 17, 18, 19 casting rods, and then somewhere from 6 to 7 spinning rods per family.
Actually, it's a little bit heavier casting just due to the fact of the technique specifics. All the crankbait rods are going to be casting, so it is a little bit heavier, but it's not that far weighted. There is a lot of spinning in the lineups.
It's becoming more prevalent, isn't it?
It is.
I still know bass anglers are like, I'm not using what they call it, a fairy wand. I'm like, it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's fun to catch fish on it, but as you're developing these things, you have to accommodate the regionality, right? So I don't think that there's a lot of people that live on Okeechobee as an example that are going to throw a crankbait. Maybe there's a guy out there that has a secret thing set up, but do you still offer, like across the country, if people are not buying online and they want to walk into tackle stores, do you generally set them up to accommodate regional presentations, or is it just the family, here it is?
Oh no, it's definitely regionally specific, and all of our sales guys are going in and actually producing a lineup for that specific consumer base, right? So, if they're going down to Lanier, it's going to be, heavier on the spinning side because they're going to be looking at, spots and some of that application. So it's definitely not just, all or nothing. It's definitely to that individual.
So to maintain your endurance on the water, and let's talk muskie fishing here specifically. When we put the muskie gear down last night, and this was kind of a funny story, we had Kim in the boat with us, who's a marketing director at PR, right? tough as nails she is. Like, high five, Kim, if you get a chance to listen to this. Super impressed. I would have complained and sat down. In fact, I wanted to complain and sit down anyways, and I was out there doing it. But we decided to put the musky rods down and just go have some fun, and we caught some bass. But the speed at which you fish for bass is very much faster than you might think you fish for muskies. Yeah, you're casting a lot for muskies, but the action, the rod gets used twice as much, if not more. And if you want to cast a big rubber like some of these baits in the Savage line, there's numbers of that's a very popular late summer into fall presentation. You cannot move fast because you're going to hurt yourself. You're literally going to hurt your joints if you're going too quickly. And the rod, you guys now have a 9-foot 10, or is it even a 10-foot rod once it's finished? What's the
10 foot, yep.
10 foot? Does that sound excessive? If you haven't musky fished, you're probably like, that thing, it's unbelievable. But when you're fishing with it, all of a sudden you're not wrecking your shoulders, your wrists, your arms, and it's a slower cast, and you can bomb that thing out there without having to whip it really hard. I turned around last night and watched him just going to work with a frog. I mean, it was cast, and of course he was catching more fish than the rest of us. But the action of the rod and the action of the fishing demands a little bit different pace.
Right.
Whereas musky fishing, you've got to maintain a level of endurance, or you're going to burn out before the day's over. And these rods have accommodated that, and you've taken that into account.
Oh, no doubt. And a lot of that is ergonomics, but for the action part that you're talking about, we definitely have, and I mean we're flexing those with 2 to, well, I mean at times 12 pounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually physically putting that load on them to understand where those points are that are moving, and then also as you're casting those to make sure that we're putting taper changes to accommodate the need for improving the cast, but also not affecting the end result of the wreckage of your shoulders and elbows, right?
You got to embrace the suck. That's a part of this game. But one of the surprises I had when I got here, and I must have just either missed it at ICAST in 2023, but the HMG line is back in the musky rods, and they're very comfortable. They're pleasant to look at. I know that that's not necessary in a successful rod, but it does look good. Right. And I think that if you're looking to, I guess, talk about the differences in the world, in the Elite versus the HMG lineup in the musky family.
Sure. So, I mean, ultimately it is a material change, right? So on the Elites, we're using, a 30 and 36 ton. And then on the HMGs, we're using a 20 or a 24 and a 30 ton. So we have a lot of the same materials because, as mentioned, both of them have 30 ton, but on the Elites, the 30 ton is the main pattern and the most used. And then on the HMG, the 24 ton is the majority of the product or the material actually used. So there is a little bit of a change on physical weight of that, but honestly, that's really about it. Actions are the same throughout the lineup, which is another good conversation point here, because we did family flex on these, which is something that's a little bit unusual, and that's the entire series. And the one benefit of that one, and what we were trying to really get to, and one of the other true reasons why we really needed to refresh this whole thing was just to be really consistent on actions. So if you've got an 8.5 foot extra heavy on Elite, that the HMG 8.5 foot extra heavy is going to be identical. And while you may not be able to recognize that so much by flexing that on the floor on a musky rod, you're doing that on a medium light walleye rod. Very noticeable if there's a little bit of a change there. So that's one huge thing that we've done here also, just to make sure that, no matter if, you're utilizing an Elite or a world class, but your nephew wants to come fishing with you and you're like,
not giving him the good one.
Sure he wants that one. But you can get him an Eagle or an HMG and be confident that it's going to be the identical action and be able to work whatever technique you're using that identically to what you're using.
What's the price difference between the two in general?
Another
loaded question. You can look that up.
It's about $100. About $100. It varies product to product, but yeah. about that?
Well, they're both fantastic. And so when you're talking actions and muskie rods, that might be if you haven't spent a lifetime muskie fishing, or if you've just seen it happen occasionally, you're smarter than we are. I'll put that out there. But there is action differences. There's action requirements when you're on the water. And as a couple examples, we could go through numbers of classes of baits. There are basically your pull paws that are like a lighter, like a suic, a bobby bait, or a Big Daddy. So that's like a wooden bait with 3 trebles, and you pull it, it dives, it rises, it dives, it rises. It's not a heavy bait. And if it's windy, it's hard to cast. Now the secret is I can't let this out of the bag. I have a proprietary technique that I use to spiral the bait through the air, and that's not true at all, because it just sometimes happens once in a while and it goes far. But you need to have a little bit lighter action rod, a little bit shorter rod for that, because you're doing a vertical, just like a jerk bait, straight down to the water, jerking action that brings that bait through the water. So if I'm going to pick a rod for that, it's going to be a 8.6. Probably a heavy.
Yep.
And that's an ideal rod for that presentation. But then you span the entire presentation base up to now I have a triple extra heavy in the elite lineup. Is that rod going to make the final cut?
Oh yeah.
That triple extra heavy. You probably know about this. I went and did a shoot with Spencer Berman on Lake St. Clair, and we had 4. I think you guys shipped us to the hotel to film In-Fisherman TV with 4 double extra heavy rods. And that technique on St. Clair, it's ripping big rubber. That's what it's called. And Spencer was like, these are just not heavy enough. I'm like, man, come on, they're double X heavy, they're going to work. Well, he was right. It was exhausting with a double extra heavy throwing a Medusa or a pounder, or as we were throwing here, the crosstail, the Savage crosstail.
Yep.
So it's basically a pound bait that's anywhere from 12 to 14 to 15 inches long. Well, the goal is you want to rip that rod as hard as you can, and you want that bait to span about 10 to 12 feet before it dives. And that's what triggers muskies in Lake St. Clair. That works here. That works at Lake of the Woods. But if you to cast those heavy baits, just a subtle difference in the double to the triple X made all the better in the world.
No.
And I talked with Justin after that trip. He's like, well, we're going to send you a prototype and go spend a little time with it. And you're right. It came almost perfect. And I really didn't have hardly any suggestions to make other than the action was right. When you're ripping a bait that heavy, the reel seat would give a little. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember who I spoke to about that, but they said, well, we can add a second reel seat nut.
Yep, a locking nut. Yep. And
so I've seen those on these rods, and that prevents that reel from doing this in your hand, like stationary on the rod. The rod's not twisting; it just gets loose,
right, because
of the aggressive nature of that presentation. So you are covered for light bucktails that I would use on that same rod with the dive and rise baits, all the way up to the triple extra heavy. And if you want a complete musky set that is going to cover that spectrum, like, you've got it there in that Elite Series and the HMGs.
For sure.
So, I mean, you got to be crazy, but when you have the right equipment, you can do this.
Oh, no doubt. And it doesn't hurt that bad.
It really doesn't. Well...
I don't know.
We're not out on the water today, so it does have a little bit of impact. But I don't know, Bailey. When you fish where you fish, you spend a great deal of time in a kayak, and you mentioned something a bit ago that I want to unpack some more. I think that ICAST can be overwhelming when you walk the aisles and you've got you need to have 25 rods to make up your bass collection or whatever. You use the same gear, as you said. What did you say? Shore kayak to boat? What did you, was that?
I don't change it up because I'm in a kayak. Some people shorten it up or try to have kayak specific rods, and I don't.
But not every consumer is going to buy the entire family, right? That's just that's not realistic. So if there is a handful of rods that kind of cover most bases, and you definitely in a kayak situation, you're limited on space. You don't want to snag your rods, which I've done. You need to be able to maneuver capably without costing yourself money. And honestly, the shore thing is the same. Like, it's real easy if you want to take a backpack and 5 rods, like, you're inevitably going to leave something somewhere. You're going to walk into a tree. Just things are going to get tangled. So you want a 4-wheel drive rod and reel combo.
Yeah.
What are 2 that you would recommend without pause?
2
or 3. If it's a kayak scenario, 3 on shore is not unreasonable.
Yeah, I'd say just you can keep things universal, and like anywhere from a 7 to 7.3 medium heavy is going to cover a lot of your bases casting wise. 7 foot medium fast spinning is going to cover a lot of your spinning and more finesse techniques. And if you want 2, that's the 2 right there. Just that keeps it pretty universal. And of course, you're going to have your extremes. Like if you want to go punch or deep crank, like of course you're going to have rods that be better equipped. But
right,
I think from you take a 7.1, 7.2 medium heavy casting, and that's going to cover a jig, a Texas rig, a chatterbait, top water, whatever you want to do. Those will cover all your bases if you don't want to go crazy technique specific.
Like bombing a frog way into the rice that, like 100 yards.
I had that thing folded yesterday.
So yesterday, let's talk about this. This was fun. So yesterday evening, we were fishing with Kim and went and decided to we wanted to catch a fish. So we went green bass fishing back in a bay here. And I think there's a difference in tournament fishing. And maybe you would have done this in a tournament. I don't know. But it was risky throwing a frog 50 yards back into the middle of the rice. But guess what? That's where they were.
Got to put it where they live.
You got to put it where they live. But it was a funny scenario because you're like, there's no way he's going to get that fish out of there. And Bailey is in the back in like this athletic pose, the rod doubled all the way over, cranking as fast as he can. But dang, if it didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, you just, like I was saying, if you're not putting it where they live, you're not going to get bit. Tournament or not, like if you're not taking the risk, there's no point. But in that scenario, would have loved to have like a broomstick.
A really big
heavier,
rod. Yep.
That way they don't get a chance to even turn their head.
So elaborate that a little bit. So in that situation, you've got yards and yards of line out over top of rice, and you have bass hitting ferociously. But even in this scenario where it was working, you have a split window to make the right hook set, because if those fish have that bait in their mouth, they go down in. Like you're probably not going to get them out at that distance, especially.
You get them a second. Not even to get their head turning around a reed patch. If you don't have a heavy enough rod, like you're not going to be able to turn them as easy. You can definitely do it. Like we made it happen last night with a medium heavy. But like when you have that rod that has more leverage, and especially heavier line, they don't. You get their head point towards the boat. You get them skiing. They're done. Like you're getting them to the boat as long as you got good hooks in them.
These fish were like coming up over these clumps of rice, and the poor things were like never thought they'd be up that high. But you're right though. In a tournament situation, if you're trying to cash a check, you're trying to win. You need to have the kind of gear that you can rely on.
Yeah.
If you're fun fishing like we were last night, it was laughable.
Send it.
Yeah, send it. And it was enjoyable to watch that. But that's a good example of having the right rod. And I'm going to tell you a story that I'm still a little bit haunted by. This year I fished a series here in Minnesota that was a singles thing, and there's a particular lake at Brainerd or near Brainerd that my son and I have done very well on, and I was excited. I saw this on the schedule. I'm like, I got a shot. This is in July. The fish are going to be set up right where I need them to be. And I jumped 2 4-pounders off in that tournament. Like I just didn't get a good hook set. They were kind of short striking, and I was like, oh man. Had a limit, but I decided to move up shallow into some reeds, and I was using this is a bass tournament now, right? We're not talking heavy musky gear, heavy punching gear, but I used a 7.6 heavy Abu Garcia.
Veritas?
I think it was Veritas. Yeah. I think that's what I said. So, using a 3/4 ounce jig in the bulrushes, and that's a thing here in Minnesota that's a great a great location to find bass throughout their season. Fish eats in the second or third cast, and I set the hook, and I knew it was a big one, and it came up and turned sideways, and I could see like fin to belly. It was that big. They always get bigger with this story, but I would say anyways, upper 4 is probably 5 pounds, and 7.6 heavy rod, 65-pound braid. That fish managed to wrap itself around a clump of those bulrushes, and I was completely beat. And that fish got stuck, came off, and I lost it. But to your point, sometimes it's a part of it. And those big fish, and now had you caught a big one yesterday, or
it would have been a different story.
It would have been a different story. So there's an element of your quarry, or your if you're equally matched, you're going to pull 2.5s and 3s out of most things. But a big fish is different.
Yeah, it's just part of the game. It's just part of the tug of war in that scenario, anyway. Yeah.
Gosh, it's a lot of fun though. So as we're sitting here talking about the how many SKUs?
264.
264 SKUs from Fenwick. You guys are already thinking 1, 2, 3 years down the road. And without, we're not going to give any of that away, but as a developer, as an engineer, as a guy that really pushes himself to get to the next level, how far down the road are you on what's coming?
Oh, I mean, we're always looking for the next thing, and always, also looking for, is there any new techniques that are coming out? Is there any new things that are happening in the industry or in the fishing game that are needed that doesn't have the right, tool in our arsenal? So we're always looking at that, and I mean we're in R&D, so that is just what we do. We're always looking for the next innovation. We're always looking for the next material, and that's kind of where we're at. Can't really allude to where we're at.
That's fair. I know.
We are looking, and definitely have our foot, in the right direction, I think.
Well, you guys have done a great job with I would call it a rebirth of this brand. And I think that to anybody that is been a part of the In-Fisherman readership or TV show series over the years that has learned as much as I have too from what Doug Stange and Rob Newman and the crew who's been here for so long, what they've taught, Fenwick is the perfect brand. And I'm not just tooting your horn, okay? I'm not the kind of guy to do that, but you can cover almost any species that swims in the Midwest, but coast to coast as well. And you can cover it effectively.
No doubt. We feel really fortunate and to have kind of the legacy that Fenwick has, and we feel really good about what we've done to continue that legacy with Fenwick with this new launch.
Well, I want a topic change here a little bit, and I want a semi deep dive in a fishery that you live by. We talked about it early on here that the Columbia River it may be one of the better proving grounds for rods in general, but you have so much to deal with there, and I don't know anything about it other than it seems like there are numbers of huge walleyes in that river.
There is.
So to those that don't know, I know we've done some filming on there over the years. I've told Doug I want to go do it. He's like, we haven't really had a recent successful run there, so it's going to be on my list. But if somebody wants to come and experience the Columbia River, what do you prepare them for?
You can catch really great numbers year round, but obviously, in the fall time and winter time, you're going to catch a bigger average fish. But I mean, just the numbers of fish the density is really, really good. And in the fall time, like it's pretty common to catch double-digit fish daily. Maybe not
daily.
Everybody, but at least, there's no doubt that we average really close to a double-digit fish every day.
What's the river like? Is it dirty water? Is it where you're catching these walleyes? Is it really big?
It is a big river. I mean, we're catching them, a little bit farther up, but it's heavy current. The water never is super clean, but I mean, it always has, on average, it's probably 3 to 4 foot of viz. So visibility is average. But I mean, it's, anywhere from generally catching them, 10 to 25 feet deep and in relatively decent heavily current. So a lot of fun.
Well, in keeping walleyes, of course, demands personal responsibility. I think anywhere with any type of species, crappies, bluegills, smallmouth bass, you don't want to fillet too many of those.
Certainly.
I know he would never do that. But that fishery,
You want to have a funny story?
Well, let's have it. You can't do that and not tell it.
I'll throw myself for the bus because I'm a big catch and release guy. I don't keep too many fish, but we had a trip when we actually launched these Fenwick rods. We went up to Oneida and caught a bunch of smallmouth, largemouth, walleye, anything that swims. We were fishing for it, and so we kept some walleyes. I told people if you could run into them, throw them in the live well. I'll cook them up for dinner or whatever. And it came to filleting them, and I haven't probably filleted anything in several years, and didn't help. I mean, there was the knife. The one knife we did have was dull. That was in the Airbnb, and it wouldn't have helped either way. I butchered the damn thing, and Dave came down there and was like,
"Did you save him?"
Oh, yeah. It was bad. Like, I'm getting everything ready in the kitchen, and I say it was like 40 minutes. It was probably like 15 or 20, and I look down there, and he's a fish and a half in. And I'm like, oh, man, he probably needs a little help down there.
Yeah, Dave and Brett McComas from Target Walleye came down there like, let's let somebody know what they're doing. Do this.
Well, you showed me a picture, and that was my point. Like, you can go on a meat run at the Columbia River, and you only do it once a year, and you've got your walleyes for the year.
Yeah, and it's a fun time, and we do go on a meat run once a year. But other than that, I mean, we're catch and release. You know, the crazy part about the Columbia is there is no limit on bass or walleye in the Columbia. So, you know, and it's the state trying to, you know, limit that fish in there because they are predatory species on the salmon and steelhead, which is the predominant fish.
Yeah,
in
well,
that river.
you have to manage a fishery to some extent that way. But do you feel like over the years, I mean, you look at Guntersville as an example. There's a tournament on that lake 365 days a year.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And it's still, I don't think it was as good as it was, say, in the early 2000s where it took, you know, 25 pounds to be in the money. But you still have to catch over 20 pounds to be consistently good there. And there are exceptions to that. But that fishery has proven reliable, catch and release, heavy pressure, and you can still go catch them. Do you feel like the Columbia River kind of carries something similar where you can go out and just hammer these walleyes once or twice a year, but catch and release and whatever, and it still produces?
Oh, certainly.
But why is it so good?
You know, and I think, for one, there hasn't been a ton of pressure. We're gaining more and more pressure, especially as our...
It's a long way from everything, so you've got to get there.
It is, but with that said, you know, a lot of our salmon and steelhead fisheries have been going downhill. So a lot of those guides that are guiding for salmon and steelhead, you know, are changing their routine and they're doing a lot more walleye fishing. And obviously smallmouth come along with that as bycatch, or they're actually targeting them as well. So, I mean, I think at this point it is still sustainable, but I do worry that, you know, that there could be some issues long term.
So catching the walleyes, the long-term effort there is to improve the salmon and steelhead production rate.
Correct.
Okay. Well, that makes perfect sense. I mean, if you think about when and where smallmouth and walleyes exist, oftentimes they compete.
Yep.
And so there needs to be a balance there. And a prime example here in Minnesota is Mille Lacs. You know, I think that the DNR does a pretty good job overall, but that lake has kind of, I think, been misunderstood. And a lot of the times where they net these fish, and I can't speak to this 100%. It's generally in the same place, and so their sampling data can often be skewed. You can't go to Mille Lacs right now and not catch a ton of walleyes.
Sure.
But you cannot keep a walleye off that lake this year. So I think that's probably going to maybe the restricted keep has increased that, but I mean, are you multiple years into this effort to keep walleyes?
We are. I think we're 5 or 6 years into the
no limit.
And I'll be honest with you, I think it's actually getting better. But with that said, I think, you know, I don't think that's because they took the limits off. I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, we've had warmer summers up there in the recent history, and we have a ton more vegetation in the river. Like every year, it is noticeably increased in how much, you know, weed growth we have. And both bass and walleye are seemingly increasing in numbers and size, honestly.
Talk about the bass fishery. I've heard about it being a fantastic bass fishery.
The bass fishery is amazing. Great numbers. I mean, you're never going to go catch that 7, 8 pounder very often, at least in the river. Like you have that opportunity in the Great Lakes, but they're river bass, right? So they're a little bit longer. They're a little bit skinnier,
a little bit meaner,
but for quantity wise, I mean, we have an immense population there. That it's a huge fishery that's super fun, and I mean, it still takes a lot of times in April and May. I mean, it's taken 23 pounds of smallmouth for your 5 fish to win a tournament.
That's big anywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
So largemouth wise, are there like oxbows and backwaters and sloughs that you can go into? Is that generally where they live?
There is, and pretty much all the tournaments, especially in the springtime. I mean, it takes, especially when you get in the upper reaches, there's a few different sloughs and places up there that you're not winning a tournament without a big largemouth or two in your bag in the springtime. Not so much in the summertime, but there is a little bit, but the predominant fishery is smallmouth. The numbers of green ones in the river itself is pretty low.
That's been fascinating to me, but I don't think that the West Coast in general, or west of the Rockies, doesn't really get I think the credit it's due, and that might be by design to an extent, because there are fisheries in the West, especially where Brandon Palaniuk is from, and you fish with brain freeze here, Luke, yes. Yep. So I mean, there are some very quality anglers that have come out of the area, but my goodness, there's some world-class stuff going on there that people are just starting to figure out, and you don't think about the Columbia River as being an ultimate destination, but I mean, man, if you want to have the multi-species trip of a lifetime, you need to put that on your list.
For sure. I mean, they just had a BAM tournament up there that I think, was early August, late July. I mean,
it was just a few weeks back.
I think it took like 18 pounds a day to win.
That's nothing to slouch at.
Yeah.
It's pretty stout. Like, they're catching, herds of fish too.
Yeah. Over multiple days. I mean, that's solid July fishing, right?
So, do they have walleye tournaments there too? I would think they'd have to.
They do have a few, but it hasn't been a lot. I mean, again, it's just the destination is a little bit more difficult. They've got some smaller stuff, but there is not a lot of big tournaments that are hosted out of there.
Well, I think you guys are doing a good job of keeping it on the low too.
Well,
to speak for somebody who's had a fishery on the low getting blown up right now, it sucks.
It does, and I think that we talked a little personal responsibility, and this is we could go deep into the weeds on the whole forward-facing sonar thing, because I think the most important component to that being successful and useful is practicing a little self-restraint here and there. You don't need to continue to catch crappies from deep water after you caught your limit.
Right.
Go catch something else. But really, I imagine there's probably special interest groups where you live that want to keep the walleyes because it's such an amazing fishery. Are there people that are opposed to these unlimited keep rates?
Oh, there's definitely both sides of that story, right? So all the salmon and steelhead guys are definitely doing that, but all of the warm water guys are definitely but there is definitely not as much opposition for the no limit as there is for it, unfortunately, currently.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you think there's a balance that can be achieved?
I do, and I think some of the I think there is some restrictions that should be put back into place, but we'll see if we ever get there. But I mean, some of the fisheries up like Lake Roosevelt, upriver farther, that is an impoundment or a lake. I mean, it's still a 16 fish a day limit. So
that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, still a 16 fish a day. If there's 100 boats out there, I mean,
that's
do the
hefty.
math. It's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's as an example here, there is what we jokingly refer to as the bucket brigade, that and they're probably of the older generations where they go to keep almost everything that they catch. And I mean, I'm running out of deer meat right now, so like I'm anxious for September 15th to get here, because I definitely need to restock the freezer. But I would prefer to be in that cycle of, we're getting to the end of the summer, we're running out of meat. I'd rather see an empty freezer, go hunting hungry, as they say, and replenish that for the year, as opposed to having layers and layers of stuff that you never get to. Like, to me, that almost, there's guilt with that. So I don't know why, but there seems to be an abundance of anglers that came from the days of you need to catch fish to survive, and I don't know that they can get away from that necessarily. So they do keep every limit of crappie that they can get, every limit of walleye that they can get, and they do have an impact on the fishery. There's enough of those here. They're able to do it. They've paid for their license. I'm not downplaying what they're able to do, but that's the personal responsibility side of things. Do you need to have 27 limits of crappies in your possession? You're not legally allowed to, but the DNR doesn't go and check freezers.
Right.
So at some point, I think there has to be, take a step back. What are you going to consume?
Yep.
And are you eating fish every single day? I don't know anybody that does that.
No.
I think if you're fulfilling, like if you're eating everything, like you're saying, like you're not having it wasted in the freezer and it's sitting there for ages. I have no issue with people that keep, especially if it's going to help them feed families by all means. But it's when you come to the point where it's like, I'm noticing I'm always having fish in the freezer that I'm not eating. Then maybe that's the sign that you need to take a step back, practice catch and release. But also on the other side of that, like we have a lot of incredible fisheries biologists that are in charge of maintaining all that for us too.
That's right. And Minnesota ranks up there as one of the greatest fisheries in the world. So we maintain that because of regulations, and sometimes it gets exhausting, right? I mean, yesterday coming out of one of the lakes we were fishing, we got stopped for 15 minutes while the drain dry or clean drain dry volunteer was there picking tiny little weeds off my boat, and I'm like, oh goodness. But really, it's that level of responsibility that comes into play again. So I have ruined a fishery or two myself, and it's my fault. There's two of them here in this state that back in the 2005, 6, 7, 8 time frame were unbelievable bass fisheries, and I was so into like sharing that I told too many people, and too many people have gone and fished it. Now, this particular lake in general did not have a boat ramp. It had a 2-track down a hill through the woods, and it had washouts that were 2 and 3 feet deep. And if you did not have a 4-wheel drive truck or the type of boat that's set high on a trailer, you weren't getting into this place. And it was the kind of thing, and I'm not even kidding here, literally would take you 4 hours to catch 25, 26 pounds of largemouth in your best 5 and 100 fish count. 4 hours.
Holy moly!
I mean, you do the math. It's a fish a minute easy.
Yeah.
And I would go there a couple times a year because I in my mind I didn't want to overfish it, but I was bragging to a buddy, or I told somebody, I'm like, oh man, you want to go to a bass fishery? You got to go check this out. I'm claiming 100% responsibility on this particular lake. We went to Alabama. And we came back the first year, brought the kayaks actually, and there was a boat ramp built at this place, a parking lot built at this place, and it was full. Every day that we were there, it was full. And it has, can you go catch 50 bass still? Yeah, but they're all, rinky-dink bass. But I think that I wouldn't have said anything if I could go back and do it over. But in a case like what you've got going on, you have no control over what's going on at Cayuga. And I think it goes in, it ebbs and flows. I think there's going to be some attention there. It's going to wane because let's be honest, where that is a long way from everything too. And that's not traditional like bass country like the Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia time.
You'd think, but the day after that record was caught, there was no parking at any ramp.
No, I agree with that, but I think that's going to wane in years to come. So the fishing that you now find difficult to enjoy, or it's harder to be successful, I think that give it a year or two, it might change again. So what would you do differently in a case like that? If you caught a 12-pounder today, if you caught a state record, Bailey, world famous kayak angler, would you register it?
I think I would.
Would you?
I mean, I don't blame it at all for what's happening. Like that's a 12-pounder in the north is unbelievable. I would have done the same thing he did and registered and got it verified. Because especially, I mean, I got a whole shtick with the previous record on New York is they call it public, but there's no private, or it's the whole access around the entire lake's private. There's no way to get on it, but they call it a public lake. So I was glad to see that record fall. And it was for 30 years. Like records are meant to be broken.
That's right.
So it was great to see it all happen. I think it was
something you guys can all be proud of that are from the area.
Yeah,
right?
Everyone was happy to see it fall. I think what we're hoping now is that we've had a lot of problem, and we're in the trenches right now. The anglers of trying to protect that lake because there's the tourism department there does not seem to like grass or understand. I think it's an education thing. Is they just don't understand. Basically it comes down to anglers don't have a seat at the table in New York, and we're fighting hard to do that. And I think this buzz of this record is going to help us get more national attention to that. I've already gotten some great fisheries biologists like Gene from Bass and Steve Barden from MLF that are helping us with that. And so hopefully the future's bright, but right now it's not. It's a lot of doom and gloom in the next 2-3 years for Cayuga.
Well, but you're involved.
We're actively working to try to find a common ground. Like I'm all for everybody, the pontoon, wake boats, everybody having their opportunity on the water, but we can cohabitate. Like we don't need to carpet bomb the whole place.
Well, that happens more than you probably know. It happens all over the place. There's a particular lake in Iowa that is arguably fishing as good as any lake in the country, and they have increased the amount of weed killing on that lake. And you've been there a bunch of times, and that lake gets just impossible to catch fish out of for a month and a half of summer.
Well, shoot, Guntersville is probably fishing one of the top 3 lakes in the country right now, even with how much pressure. Like they're putting out massive bags in numbers. They're trying to do the whole thing again that happened 5-6 years ago of go back and try to kill all the grass, and now it's all the anglers are trying to fight again to protect that.
Well, and we're outnumbered. We're greatly outnumbered, especially now we pay for license fees, we buy gas, we have impacts on the economy, blah, blah, blah. And some anglers certainly own properties on those lake shores, but most of the people that own properties don't want to deal with grass by their docks. I mean, here especially, I could take you to 30 lakes that have, on a windy day, their dock, their shore is just piled up with cut grass. Now, if you want to go back to how that grass got cut and chopped up, a lot of it came from the water skiers, the pleasure boaters, and it's not their fault. That's the lake scenario. They have a boat on their lake. They want to take advantage of the resource, but it impacts everybody. But their response is to go spray the weeds so that it's a cleaner lake. Well, I don't. With as strict as they are on our clean, drain, dry here, like if you get stuck driving or if you get caught driving a boat down the road that has its plug in, it's like automatic $500 fine. You're not even up for discussion.
Wow, really?
So don't do that. But it's okay to spray these lakes. To me, it's a contradiction. Yeah. It's hard to get through that. But the reality is the fishing is going to be impacted by all the parties. And so if there's a way to kind of come together, work towards a common goal, you're going to get there. But it's not going to happen tonight, tomorrow, or next week. It's a multi-year process.
And once you get there, you got to maintain it too. That's the thing, is there's always going to be somebody trying to combat the other side. And we have one lake that was an incredible fishery that they nuked and all grass is gone. But it's New York. The way you can kind of look at it is we can't put brush piles, nothing,
same
in the
here.
water whatsoever.
Right.
But the homeowners can put these giant weed mats like by their docks, and what that does is kills all the grass. But so they're allowed to place stuff in the water, but the anglers can't. And that kind of tells you right now where we're at with anglers.
So here in Minnesota, it's the same thing. Like if you are not supposed to sink brush or throw a Christmas tree on the lake, and if your ice house goes through the ice, you get fined heavily, which is fair. All that's fair, but there are lakes in the South where there are guys that it's completely legal to put together brush piles, epic brush piles.
That is the fishery.
That's right. Yeah. And they're the ones that have these waypoints to start, but they eventually get found out, and the cycle continues on. But again, some of those fisheries, though, they improve because of that. And those are impoundments that don't have enough structure necessarily to sustain a population of bass that can handle countless tournaments. So maybe the conservation minds that lead those state fisheries are like, this actually helps the fishery long term. Whereas here in Minnesota, there is so much grass and so many lakes. They look at each individual lake, but they also look at the fishery as a whole. And I think that's something that a lot of people need to realize about tournament fishing and catch and release is the fishery impacted by this type of fishing? When they say the fishery, they don't mean this lake specifically. They mean the bass fishery. Is it sustainable to handle numbers of huge tournaments annually, weekly sometimes? Can it do it? And Guntersville is it's an anomaly with the amount of pressure and attention it gets. But catch and release works, and live weigh-ins work. But here in Minnesota, I'll be honest, I love, as a hunter, I love opening my live wells and seeing those 5 critters swimming around in there. Like, that's just a fun part of it for me. And being able to hold them up in front of my buddies and be like, yeah, you guys didn't get this one. That's a fun part of it. But here in Minnesota, these fisheries, I don't think will sustain heavy pressure in tournaments like that, where you're going to have however many boats on this lake here. By the time this podcast publishes, this tournament will have been over, but the Bassmaster Open is going to be on Leech Lake next week. I'm excited to see how it goes, because you always learn something new when top tours come to your home waters. But I'm nervous about this fishery because in Minnesota, the growth rate is slow. Right. And maybe it's similar in Washington. I don't know.
For sure.
It takes 5 years for a fish to become 3 pounds if it's lucky. It takes 10 years to reach 5. And if you want to get into those upper reaches of quality here in Minnesota, you're talking 15-year-old fish. So at what level are they able to handle the stress of multiple rides in the live well and getting weighed in and then thrown back? We don't know that. But what I do know is the reproduction of that is difficult. And so I think that warrants a little bit different approach to tournaments here.
Yeah. Well, and that's a cool thing that's going on. I learned from Stephen Barden, who's doing the MLF's fisheries management, does some stuff freelance by himself as well in Texas. But they actually have a study they're doing right now, working with, I believe his name's Jake Norman, who's one of the he's basically in charge of Lake Fork, so he's got a pretty hefty team and everything.
And that's a challenging situation too.
Yeah, it is. And they're studying mortality rate. So one of the things they're doing is actually working with tournaments of like tracking fish once they're released to see what happens with those fish. What's the percentage rate of those fish that survive? And they've found it's rather successful. But it's also pending time of year, water temps, where they're released. Do they have a release boat? Things like that. But it's cool to see that these things are actually being studied, though.
Yeah, and it's changing. The attention to bass fishing is growing, and that's a good thing. I think we all want that. We want it to become more sustainable across the country. As more people do it, there's more of an impact on the fishery. So the way things are done needs to adapt and grow too. And I think we need to stay open to that. But to keeping fisheries healthy, anytime a particular fishery just booms, it's going to get more attention naturally. Yeah. And that result is going to be tougher fishing for a while. But I feel like that ebbs and flows. It's a year or two of heavy pressure, and then people have done that. And what's next?
And that's also the impacts of today's age of social media.
I
don't think OHIV would have blown up if it wasn't for Ben Milken. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's not to his discredit. Like, I think if he just didn't stumble upon it because of that ice storm in Texas being the one thing that had a town open, they might have not have stumbled on that lake.
I wanted to go down there right away. Like when that news sort of broke, I said I would really like to get down there and film, do some in-fish stuff. And it's such a trip to haul a boat from Minnesota to Texas.
Yeah.
But man, I think there are fish that we're finding nowadays that weren't able to be found before. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it comes back to that personal responsibility thing. And OHIV and Fork this year especially, that was a very impressive tournament, the Bassmaster event. Yeah. They caught a lot of really big fish, and a lot of those fish were granted, you can expect there to be 8, 9, and 10 pounders at that event, right? But to see the numbers of big fish this year, I think is probably a result of anglers being able to find them in places they previously couldn't find them.
Yeah.
And that technology warrants a little bit of discipline. That lake, the nice thing about that lake and the tournament that happens there at Lake Fork is it is I think you can bring one fish in over 24 inches, and so you're not hauling all of those fish to the live well. Yeah. So the people that manage that fishery, they've got a large task. They have a tremendous amount of pressure, and that's probably another one of those lakes. It's like we know there's going to be people traveling across the country to experience Fork, so we're going to do our best to maintain that fishery by putting heavier restrictions on it, and I'm all for that, and I wouldn't change that to maintain it. But I mean, can you imagine though if they lifted the restrictions? Let's say they changed the restrictions for you at the Columbia River, the fishery would change in a year.
Oh, I would think.
It doesn't take long.
Right.
I'm just glad we have people that are a lot smarter than us that are maintaining these fisheries for the most part. Pending the state, yeah.
Well, I've dealt with some people that are definitely a lot smarter than me on a regular basis. But the true story is, how do you catch a muskie when you're sitting in the house on a couch? Is that a fair question?
That is a fair question.
And I'm not mad about that, but sometimes you got to take. I kind of want to close on this a little bit. So at Fenwick, you guys have worked hard to appeal to every genre of anglers. And make sure that they have an option that can adequately present a bait, catch the fish, bring it back in, and they're covered across the presentation spectrum. And you've done that across the different species. Well, you are not going to be successful if you're not out doing this stuff. If you want to go visit a place, go visit a place and do so responsibly, but you can be covered with the gear that you have. you can experience these places for what they are. And I guess maybe don't post every picture on social media. Text your buddies. But really it comes down to there is a level of personal responsibility I think is more prevalent now than ever. And I think that's my question is the right way to do it. You're a social media guy, Bailey. You've made a tremendous career becoming the most famous kayak angler I've ever met.
I like how it just gets more escalated as it goes on.
Yeah.
I'm totally just messing with you. But what is your rendition of responsibility on the water?
I think the biggest thing I see nowadays across the spectrum of whether it's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube is I think there's a place for people to go out and film their content, share, because that's one thing people love to do is they love to share their trips, their adventures, things like that, their catches. People want to brag. That's just kind of human intuition.
And that's social media. It's a bragging board, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think the biggest thing if you're doing that is understand that a lot of people are looking at that, whether they're following you or not. And I think the biggest thing there's nothing wrong with sharing a picture, but think about and I see a bunch of guys do it now, especially tournament guys, is what's behind them for the picture.
Yeah, we all do that.
Don't drop the lake name. Like if it's a tournament, they're gonna know where you're at.
Yeah.
But if you're fun fishing, if you're going say for an example like OHIV, you go down and maybe the lake's not known about yet. You go catch those giants, and maybe they'll know you're in Texas, but don't be like, yeah, we're at this lake. Which I think to Milken's credit, I don't think he actually tried to expose the lake name. Texas Parks and Wildlife were the one that name dropped OHIV, but I think that's the thing. It's small nuances like don't tag the lake name in your post type of deal. Like keep some sort of question of what you're doing. But at the end of the day, I don't think they're stopping any of that. I really don't think there
Well,
is,
I mean, you can't really police it. It's a personal responsibility thing.
That's the double-edged sword of social media
Right.
is you're going to expose stuff if you're going to want to share.
But you can be smart. For as example, if you're going to go to OHIV, maybe don't put 2 12-pounders in your live well for the double-fisted picture. Is that a badass photo?
Oh, yeah.
For sure. But that's a kind of place where if you want that to stay good as a destination that you could eventually visit and still experience that, the more of the double-fisted social media pics for the gram that occur, that is going to have its impact.
No doubt.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can speak to it with Columbia. Is the guys that do it in the summer with smallmouth and live well 5 fish on a fun fishing day
For a photo.
It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Right.
You're just damaging those fish for a photo that you could have taken throughout the day.
Yeah,
That's right.
100%. And don't get that extra like at the cost of the fish, right?
Exactly. Put the fish first.
Yeah.
Well, and this is coming from a guy that has done that, and I've done a lot of that.
Oh, yeah.
And I there's actually something we tried to do as a family 2 years in a row on some of the lakes in central Minnesota where the 4 of us would go out, we'd all fish together, we'd box every bass we could, so in the end of the day we could have each of us would have 2 bass, and I think we used it on a Christmas card one year. That's a little overkill, but I mean, did we hurt those fish? Probably not. But you're when you post that kind of stuff on social media, you promote the self-glorification, look at me sort of thing. And now I could justify a Christmas card, I guess, but everybody
It's a family thing. Kids get into it.
Yeah, I mean, there's times I think when it's okay to have fish in the live well for fun. In fact, that kept Tommy busy for a long time. Like he'd put his rod down, and you could see him elbowed shoulder deep in the live well playing with the fish. So I mean, I think that there's a level of personal responsibility, but also a level of, hey, I've got a realistic view on this. These fish are here to catch. They're here to enjoy. And if you're smart about it, throwing them in a live well for a little while may not necessarily hurt them. But you don't got to haul them around all day during a hot summer July afternoon.
Yeah.
So personal responsibility up your way. What would you prefer be done that way?
And I mean, again, and I stated that, we will go out one time a year and do a meat run. But, on top of that, if we catch a double-digit fish during that time, we're also not keeping those,
Yes.
And we're being responsible on trying to keep as many bucks as we can versus the bigger females. And to be honest, you get a little more meat off the bucks too. So that's not so bad. But yeah, I mean, it's just, don't harvest more than you need, and be responsible with what you take, and just be thoughtful of that. I mean, I think that's the biggest key, and that limit out mentality just kind of, it's always one of those things that gets me.
It does, and I think that's going to change as the generations go on. But and this is a catchphrase in our industry, but you do want to leave something for tomorrow.
Oh, for sure.
Yep.
I mean, we live a great life. I mean, the 3 of us lead blessed lives. I know we've talked about it. It's a great way to live. Takes a lot of work, but if you want something for tomorrow, you got to put something back. And I think that your effort to get more involved in the preservation of the fishery, that's a huge thing to do. I spent a lot of time in Iowa before I moved to Minnesota trying to get high school bass fishing brought to the forefront in Iowa. And that meant a change in regulations because you were not legally allowed on paper to cull. And you could only keep 3 bass at a time. And it just, it takes return effort. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years. But get the word out, and the more people get involved, things can be changed for the better. I would love if they'd ban spraying here, but I just don't know that we'll ever get there.
Yeah. Well, and there's 2 things to that. Going back to Stephen Barden, Tyler's Real Fishing actually put out a video with him that was really incredible in some of the conversation. But he mentioned how a lot of us anglers, we're very passionate about our fisheries. We want to we want to see it get better or maintain how good it is. And so when we see something happening, our feelings get hurt. We get worried, we get scared. And so with that, sometimes we lash out. Like, oh, this freaking, I'm at fault for it. I've done it a couple times where I'll go on a rant or 2 and blame the state. But it's the way to go about it and be productive about it is to go to your state department and ask questions. Why is the lake being maintained this way? And so I think if we could try to maintain that, ask questions, get involved in just the conversation with your state, and that might give them more, at least, responsibility and understand there's more eyes on them.
As much as we think they owe us, and they do to an extent because tax dollars fund a lot of the research and salaries and whatever, you still have to be a human being with them. And if you want to sit down at a meeting with a head DNR official and a state congressperson and you dislike them and you call them dumb, you're not going to get accomplished what you want to get accomplished. So you do have to be a human with these people and understand that you're not the only constituent that they're hearing from. And case in point, in Iowa, I fought for a long time for them to have a mandatory catch and release for the muskie fishery there, which is not very big. It's not very easy. But they kept a 40-inch length limit. They still have it in place. And the reason, and you can't argue with this, as much as I want to say, well, the muskie anglers should have more of a say, they kept the 40-inch minimum there in Iowa so that the kid that catches a 40-inch muskie off the dock has an opportunity to keep it. I get we want to teach them catch and release, but I can understand you want that kid to have a positive experience. You want them to have a reason to come back. And that provides an opportunity to talk to that kid about conservation. Sure. I would like them to change that, but they haven't for that reason. And while I don't agree with it, I can see the perspective. So at the very least, if you're willing to listen, you're willing to ask questions, you're willing to not speak without too much emotion, because I know a lot of those biologists, they don't have time for that. Like if you go off the cuff on things, they're done with you. And sometimes they probably need to hear it, but fair enough. You want to have a conversation, be human, be an adult. And it takes time. In your case, keep going to those meetings. Keep communicating with your state people. And that goes to anybody listening to this. If there is something you care about, fishing or not, be in touch, be an active, good citizen, and you'll have an impact long term. I really think so.
Well, one thing on that too, not to keep going down this rabbit hole, but in addition, what I didn't realize too is if you have watershed organizations set up, they actually have more legs and I guess responsibility, if you will, on a fishery than say your Fish and Game will. So if you can get in touch with them too, that can play a big part. And the nice part about New York, where I see there's some light at the end of the tunnel, is they're willing to communicate and really see the side. I think it just comes down to education thing. It really does.
Oh, I mean, that's across the board on everything. If you're going to have an argument about something, you better be able to prove it to a point, right? I mean, you can't just say, I feel this way, and you better heed to my opinion. Yeah. I've tried that. It doesn't work.
Yeah. One of the other things that I've seen across the country too is outdoors organizations and just the people fighting against themselves.
Yes.
And just being organized and all one together to get to and also not to be negative, right? I mean, you come to those biologists with, hey, this is stupid, and all of this, and they're just like, meh.
The meeting's over at that point.
Rather than, hey, this is a benefit if we do this. It benefits us. It benefits the general population. It benefits, Jimmy fishing off the dock, So there's a lot of things like that. But that's the biggest thing that I've seen. And it's across the nation that just outdoors people, they'll I don't agree with the hunting side and the fishing side. But, hey, if they put all of that together and fight, we've got a chance.
It's so easy to get pitted against each other. and especially in the world of social media. I think that really breeds the arguments, because you can hide behind your keyboard and whatever. But the other thing that needs to happen is a limit of propaganda, and it happens on both sides. This is a whole other non-fishing related podcast, but we have a wolf issue in Minnesota, and the deer population is nowhere near what it used to be or what it could be, and they're blaming wolves for the whole thing. And I'm like, it's a contributing factor to a list of reasons why the deer population is struggling here, most of which is likely can be blamed on weather the last 3 years. We've had tremendous winters. This last winter was good. We needed a mild winter, but instead of like pumping people full of misinformation or skewed information, why not work on an overall objective as opposed to blaming one particular contingent? And in which case, again, this is a whole other podcast, but if you wanted to open up a wolf season here, get them delisted, do you think you're going to be able to harvest enough to actually impact the population? But even there, it comes down to personal responsibility. Do you need to fill those 5 tags?
Right.
You got them. That doesn't mean you got to fill them, or your limit of walleyes, your limit of crappies. It's just a better understanding. It's an education fact. You guys have both said that. If you can educate yourself on the resource, how it's impacted at different times of year by different groups of people, and spraying to the limit keepers to the ice fishermen that just keep catching crappies, there comes a point where you need to just go do something else. Right. Go bass fishing, go put a tip up out for pike, whatever it is. Just, you can still have fun and be on the water, but if you want to enjoy tomorrow, you got to practice restrictions and responsibility. We're going deep down that rabbit trail, but ultimately Fenwick can get you there.
Yeah.
So listen, guys, this has been fun. It's been invigorating, and I think there's a lot of as far away as the Columbia River is from me, it's worth the drive. As far as Oneida and Cayuga and numbers of the St. Lawrence River is for me, it's worth going. And I think that you can visit both places with a desire to experience the fishery and don't exploit it.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's a way to do both. So
that's Fenwick brain right there. It's just that intrinsic exploration feeling where it's the fish heads,
that's the best part about, and it's not just Fenwick, but there are numbers of brands. I'm sure you could speak to this strongly, Dave, but there are fish heads creating good products across the board.
No doubt.
And I think that makes me want to purchase it. Just knowing that there's a guy that has put his time in, broken 150 rods to make sure this is right for you, and then you put it in the ceiling fan and wonder why they won't replace it. But really, you have people that give a rip about the end result. Guys, anglers, people, whoever, love to be in the outdoors, and they want to make sure that your experience is perfect without having to worry about faulty equipment.
No doubt. It's made a life for me, and I want to express that and let other people experience that as well.
So Bailey, if people want to check out your Serious Angler podcast, where's that at?
Any social media platform that you can find In-Fisherman on, that's where we're at too.
Yeah, you do a good job. World famous fishing podcaster too.
All 3 people that listen.
Bailey Eigbrett, you're a good man. I appreciate you. Dave Brinkerhoff.
Very good.
I was ready.
Yeah.
I was ready. If people want to learn more about Fenwick or any of the pure fishing brands, where's a good place to start?
On Fenwick.com.
Fenwickfishing.com.
Fenwickfishing.com. That's the best place, and actually we've got a new one coming up, so going to revitalize the website as well. It's
a cool website. You're going to have a lot of options, and really, I can't overemphasize this. It doesn't matter what you love to fish for. Fenwick has got a rod for it.
No doubt of that.
Hey, thanks for being a part of In-Fisherman Storyline. We are on the road here at Leech Lake, Trappers Point. Trappers Landing. Gosh, this place is awesome. I want to bring the family here. Thanks for listening in. We'll catch you here next time.